get her age again. That had Down syndrome, and the mother dumped her. The father is late. The mother dumped her and with her grandparents, and then the grandparents took her and dumped her in a room alone. Nobody cleans the room. Nobody gives her food, nothing, and all that. So those are also some forms of that's just to say they completely isolated her from the world. So that's also another form of exploitation they experience and abuse. And then also, lastly, from my end, from this section, they also experience financial exploitation, right? So those are some of the abuses and exploitation I want to highlight this morning.
Oh, so that means there are even other forms that you've not mentioned. That makes it there's so many forms of exploitation they suffer.
So many. So many.
Now, you would think that when we see people with disabilities, the first thing that would come to mind is empathy and sympathy, right? But from what you're saying, we're seeing that is the reverse. So how prevalent is the exploitation and abuse among people with disabilities?
Okay, it's very, very prevalent. It's very, very common. People with disability often are faced with the prevalence rate is very high, majorly because of their vulnerability status, their vulnerability state, oftentimes because they cannot help themselves, or because they need one form of support from they need one support or the other from people. So oftentimes the bad people always prey on them. Like I could say bad people because I categorize people into two groups: the good ones and then the bad ones. So the bad ones will always prey on these vulnerabilities to perpetuate their evil, right? Generally, studies estimate that people with disability are 2 or 3 times more likely to experience sexual abuse or other forms of abuse than people without disability.
Is that for Nigeria or globally?
Global.
Okay.
Yes, and then also for children with disabilities, even more, about 3 times more likely for them to suffer abuse than people who do not have disability. And then for adults, it is said that 15 to 30% of women with disabilities have reported experiencing sexual violence at some point in their lives. So oftentimes it is higher than, and we know that oftentimes it's higher than people report. You know how the reporting in our country is. So these are just statistics to show that the prevalence is higher. But I tell you that it's way, way higher than what is being reported because of our culture of silence and the nature of our society and communities. Right? So that's what I want to say about that.
Okay, so with some of the statistics you've given us this morning, you've been able to show us how often these people experience these abuses. But then, can we talk about the primary perpetrators of this abuse now? Who are the primary perpetrators of physical abuse?
Okay. So thank you again for this question. The primary perpetrators of this abuse could be caregivers, could be family relatives, like I highlighted in the story I shared earlier. It could be employers. It could even be medical personnel, and they are often. These perpetrators it depends on the level of exposure of the person and who the person is exposed to.
Okay. Oh, so that even makes it sadder, because then it means even people that normally we should trust with these people, because you mentioned caregivers, and these are people you should trust that they're in good hands, they're taking care of them, and now physically inflicting pain on these people, and it doesn't make any sense. Well, which led us to the next question now. So what are the signs and symptoms of emotional and psychological abuse in people with disabilities?
Okay. um, the signs and symptoms of people with disabilities, when they're emotional abuse, I want to categorize them into different layers, like the physical signs, where you see maybe marks on their bodies, injuries, lack of sleep, and all that, right?
Yeah.
And then the emotional, the behavioral change, the behavioral signs like withdrawal, complete isolation, or sometimes partial isolation, avoidance of interactions, or being reluctant to engage with certain individuals.
Yeah.
Fear and anxiety, visibly distressed when interacting with specific caregivers, family members, or others.
Yeah.
Aggression or irritability, sudden mood swings, low self-esteem, excessive compliance.
Yeah.
So when you see those kind of signs, you know that there's something
is wrong somewhere.
Something is wrong somewhere. And then the physical signs like sleep disturbance, insomnia, nightmares, or excessive sleeping, appetite change. Suddenly you see somebody losing weight or gaining undue weight. And then also you see them eating excessively, so that's also another sign. And then somatic symptoms like headache, stomach aches, or sometimes stress-related physical complaints without a clear medical cause. So when you see those signs, you should also know that there's something wrong. And then also there's also some communication manifestations or signs like regression, loss of previous acquired communication skills, or difficulty in expressing their thoughts, and then also hesitation to communicate, or usually fear of speaking openly or contradicting others. So when you see those signs, and then lastly you have the environmental signs. Like the overdependency on abuser. So most times you see them relying on one individual for all their decisions and activities. Right? Oftentimes mainly because of fear. And then also you see isolation, being physically or socially cut off completely from friends, families, and communities. So when you see all these signs of highlighted, you should query, it should worry you. You should query it because oftentimes these are signs that the person is going through one form of abuse or exploitation.
Oh, okay, sir. So these signs and symptoms now that you've mentioned, how does it affect the emotional and psychological, or the mental health of these people with disabilities now?
All right. So all these signs I've mentioned could lead to different forms of mental health issues, like depression. Somebody who can no longer express himself, who can no longer move freely, who has to depend on somebody and all that, can tend to be depressed because they are not really happy, they cannot express themselves and all that. So it could lead to depression. It can also lead to PTSD. It could lead to insomnia and other forms of mental health abuses because they are not really something is suppressing them, and then they are not really able to express themselves the way they ought to.
All right, sir. So now let's talk about sexual abuse now. How often, you've shared some statistics now, but let's bring it down to Nigeria. How often do people with disabilities, especially in Nigeria, experience sexual abuse in particular?
Okay, I would want to say that the global statistics I shared, information was getting from different actors, and like I highlighted earlier, in Nigeria, one of our major challenges is data collection and all that. So I might not be able to quote exact data to back my submissions. But from my experience working with people with disability and also working in communities, I can clearly say that a lot of people with special abilities experience different forms of abuses. However, because of our culture of silence and the way our society is, a lot of them are not able to come out to express themselves, to report these cases. And even when they report it, it's not taken serious because they feel that these people are not okay, and all that. So it comes with that, and then also it leads to them feeling that even if I do this, even if I report this case, it will not be taken serious with the stigma and all that. Right. So those are some of the challenges with this with people with special abilities. But I can tell you clearly that people with special abilities suffer a lot of abuses and exploitation.
All right, so which leads me to my next question now. How can these people living with disabilities, how can they protect themselves from sexual abuse, from any form of abuse really? How can they protect themselves?
All right, so for me, I have very homemade and practical ways that these people with special abilities can protect themselves. People with special abilities can take steps to protect themselves from sexual abuse by building awareness. They can get to know about their rights, so that it's easier for them to raise an alarm when these rights are being trampled upon. They can also understand what context is, gain knowledge about their personal boundaries, the right to say no, and then also recognize inappropriate behaviors around them. And then also they can develop communication skills, right? Accessible communication aids, use assistive devices or technology to enhance communication for individuals with speech or cognitive disabilities. And then they can also practice to say, they can also practice or learn assertiveness, practice to say no firmly and confidently in various situations. I've often heard young people or people say that the no was not firm, right? But for me as a person, no is no and yes is yes, right? But since the mindset of a lot of people in our communities and society is that if the no is not firm, that means the no is not a no, right? And we're also pushing narratives to see how that can be changed, pushing awareness and all that to see how those kind of mindsets can be changed. It's also very important that when people with special abilities they should be assertive, and when they are saying no, they should be very firm with the no, and when they are saying yes, they should be very firm with the yes. And then also, they should also participate in programs tailored for people with abilities, focusing on recognizing abuse, healthy relationships, and also personal boundaries. I've said that before. And then also build, this is very important for me, right? Because I know that at some point in my life where I had some challenges, personal challenges. What helped me was building trusted support network of people who I can trust within. And then I could when I'm down, I could easily go to that group of people to say yes, to say this is what the challenge is, this is what I'm suffering. How do I come out of this and all that, right? So it's very important that this build network of people, probably a network of people who also share similar special challenges with them, so that they can also share challenges, share experiences, see how they came out of this experience, how they were able to overcome this kind of challenge, what do I do when I'm faced with this and all that. So that's also very important. And then also increase independence, pursue, maybe have some little form of training in self-care skills to reduce reliance on others for intimate or personal tasks, right? And then also advocate for regular oversight and checks on caregivers to minimize power imbalance, right? So those are some of the ways that people with special abilities can also protect themselves. Yes.
All right, so before we go, sir, I would like to ask what strategies can now be implemented so to prevent the exploitation and abuse, and then also to policymakers now, how can they address this issue?
Okay, for this question, I would like to say that preventing exploitation and abuse, particularly among vulnerable population like people with special abilities, requires a multi-faced approach, which involves individuals, communities, organizations, and even the government, like you rightly said, which all these people have mentioned as stakeholders, right? So for individuals, they should teach personal safety skills. They should teach these people with special abilities personal safety tips, recognizing abuses and accepting boundaries. And then they should also provide access to education about their rights, their consents, and reporting channels for abuses.
Okay.
And then for communities, can also have public awareness campaigns to challenge stigma and promote inclusion. And then they can also train people in the community to recognize and respond to signs of abuses. And then also set up community vanguards that will be against abuses, stigmatization of people with disability and all that. And then for institutions or caregivers, they should be offered training on ethical caregiving, power dynamics, and abuse prevention. I give a very good example. The organization I work for, MICAT, we work with a lot of vulnerable people, particularly people who have suffered from human trafficking, right? Yeah. And one of the things we did was to ensure that all our staff, everybody who works for MICAT, undergo a course on sexual protection and prevention of sexual abuse and exploitation, right? So everybody went through that course so that they can get knowledge on what sexual exploitation is, how to prevent it and all that. At the end of the day, everybody signed a consent form to say, we have gone through this course and we understand this and none of us will be found guilty. And if you're found guilty, you face the law, right? So institutions should also come up with this kind of education for their staff. And oftentimes some of these things don't cost so much money. Maybe probably just internet, because you have a lot of these resources on the internet, right? And then also empowerment and advocacy. When you empower people, you give them some level. You give them some level of power over themselves, right? So you promote self-advocacy through workshops and peer support network. I'd like to emphasize on this peer support network because it's very